Indie games have become an important cornerstone of the gaming industry, and with the rise of services like Kickstarter and Steam, it makes sense that indie games have found a lot of success. However, it now seems like the ESRB are causing a headache for the indie market. Got any paracetamol?
Right, things just got a bit harder for small indie developers and publishers. For a time, it was possible to release a physical copy of an existing digital-only game without paying a hefty $10,000 fee to have it age-rated in the US. This allowed companies like Limited Run Games to produce small quantities of boxed versions of indie games for sale on store shelves. Some of these games will sell in the low thousands, if not hundreds, but they could make all the difference to a small indie developer. But in September, the ESRB introduced fees for putting age ratings on physical releases of previously digital-only games, and under the new rules, a game with a budget of less than $1 million would cost $3,000 to get it rated. Digital games can currently get automatically rated using a free service set up by the ESRB in 2011, and previously, re-releases of digital-only games did not need to be rated a second time after that by the ESRB when they went physical. Well, now they do, and they have to pay that new $3,000 fee. So what does all this mean for indie devs and publishers?
Well, you could argue that getting an ESRB rating for your game is voluntary. After all, it isn't legally required. But many retailers and online stores just won't sell your game without one, which essentially makes it mandatory. Douglas Bogart, the co-founder of Limited Run, spoke to Engadget saying that, quote, "There's no one above them, the ESRB. You have to follow their rules. Your business basically lives or dies by their whim," which is really scary in my opinion. For some developers with a budget of less than $1 million who would be getting a rating anyway, this has been great news because it's a discount from $10,000 down to $3,000 for any titles that they want to publish in the future. But for companies like Limited Run and the smaller indie devs who aren't planning to shift tens of thousands of physical copies, this creates quite a hurdle for them. Limited Run could previously publish a weird little indie game without paying for another ESRB rating. The digital version had already been rated for free, but now they have to pay.
And this is quite a serious problem for some indies, as the physical releases that Limited Run have put out have actually helped them stay afloat. As Limited Run co-founder Josh Fairhurst put it, quote, "The physical release that we're putting out could be the difference between them living another day as game developers or closing up shop and going back to something else. I think that what we're doing in terms of making the money is really important." And indie games are already beginning to suffer as a result of these changes. Just last month, Ruiner, a pretty popular cyberpunk game from indie studio Rycon Games, announced that their planned physical edition had been cancelled due to these changes made by the ESRB.
Douglas Bogart said that he would prefer the fee to be based on how many copies the publisher is going to produce, rather than the budget of the game. Limited Run usually produce 2,000 to 3,000 copies of one game, while major publishers like EA produce hundreds of thousands. And this new fee, Bogart says, can raise development costs of a game by 20% to 100%, which doesn't benefit their business or the indie devs.
Right, so that's a bit convoluted, but it's a very important story, we think. This kind of thing is very important for indie developers, and anything that makes things difficult for them, you don't want to happen, basically, because indie devs need everything to be streamlined and make sense for them and not cost them a ridiculous amount of money that they can't afford. $3,000 for an indie developer is obviously quite a big funding kind of shortfall for them to make up, and you know, a lot of them haven't even sold a game yet, so they haven't really got a big pool of money to make up. So any new changes to the ESRB and any kind of changing of the goalposts like this is going to be difficult for them, and you can easily see why suddenly being slapped with a $3,000 bill, it could cause a lot of problems for the indie developer scene in general.
We like and support indie developers on this channel, right? We often criticise the AAA business and all that. That's part of what we do here. But these indie developers could be the AAA businesses of the future. They are starting out. They need as much support as they can get. When hurdles like this are introduced, it's only right that we try and help them out and shed a light on what's going on here, because if they plan on releasing a certain amount of physical copies of games, then obviously the profit margins are pretty small because they've got to, you know, produce those games, like all the money that goes into that. But now they're slapped with an extra fee on top of that, which could be something up to like 100% of the cost of developing producing these physical copies of games. You can see where their profit margin is going to completely go, pretty much. Whereas if you're producing thousands and thousands and thousands of physical copies of games, it doesn't make that much of a difference because it's such a small 3,000 is nothing to you in that situation.
Some developers think this is good news because to them time, they would be going after this ESRB rating anyway. Their budget for development comes in under $1 million, so they get like a $7,000 discount just up for no reason, and that's great news for them. And it is good news for a lot of developers. On top of that as well, there's the argument that the ESRB is there to kind of protect kids and whatnot from violent games, and that is important in all games, indie or not, but a lot of the counter-argument from the indies who are affected by this are saying that these are like collector's items. People know full well what these games are and what's in them. They're not just like being flogged to kids left and right who don't know what they're buying. These are like targeted at people who maybe have already bought the digital version. They just love the game so much and want to support it that they want to get that physical version as well. And then by doing that, they support the developers so that maybe that developer can make another game in the future. And so for that reason, they're saying, well, I mean, do we really need this kind of extra ESRB layer of defense here? Maybe not.
If we want to be able to challenge the shitty business practices that currently happen in the gaming industry, the EAs, the Activisions and Ubisoft and everything else, we want grassroots developers like this to be free to be able to become those like big competitors to those, some might say, evil corporations. Hurdles like this aren't good news for people who still have hope for the industry, because I've still got hope for the industry, and indies is where my hope is right now. I just want it to be easier for them.
So there you go, this is the new ESRB rating system, which could have a negative effect on some indies. Are you an indie dev yourself? Let us know what you think about this down in the comments. Remember to like the video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe if you want to see more stuff like this every single day. You can check out that video right there, right now, if you want, and there's a link to Patreon if you want to support the channel. See you next time.